Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
We see the syphilitic shrinking obelisk, the white man's wilting dick. We see through dangling jowls of seedy game show trolls the smiling lie of the televised hive. The witches are watching with their thousand eyes. Witches are watching with their thousand eyes. We smell rotten teeth that speak beyond belief. A stick inside their skull would...
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 58. This episode is sponsored by the fine folks at Lee's Comics. We're working feverishly to get Headquartered, the book on the Monkees' solo careers, out in February or March of 2020 in time for Beatlefest. My co-author, Michael A. Ventrella, will be attending and selling copies of it and our previous Monkees book there. I'm doing the final edits and image placement for the TTV scrapbook. It looks really good, and I will be turning it in soon. I just got the assignment to do an article for Back Issue magazine on Underdog. The Warren Kremer book is due back in February, and I'm still working on my own Light Up Your Life travel agency, and of course, the Mad book. This episode features an artist best known for his work on the Muppets and the Nancy and Sluggo comic strips. Here he is, Guy Gilchrist. Okay, on the phone today I have Guy Gilchrist, and he has worked on various comic strips, including one on the Muppets and on Nancy, and we'll talk about that and anything else that comes up today. So how are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, Mark.
All
Good
right.
to be with you.
Thank you very much. And so I guess, like I usually do, tell us about yourself and how you got into doing comic strips and artwork.
Well, gosh. Well, do you want to go, all the way back to, childhood and stuff?
Sure. Yeah, what influenced you, what training you have, things like that?
Oh, well, training. None in the, not much in the traditional sense. But my mom was a big influence on me. She was a very good artist as a schoolgirl and won some competitions. She was a single mom, and she worked at a diner, and she worked at a hotel. And the things that did was that we were very poor, although I didn't realize it. I thought that we were rich. It was just the way that she framed things. But wherever she would be working, she would take me as a baby and open up the Sunday paper, the daily paper, and she would draw ovals, and she would show me that we could create these cartoon characters out of that. And that was how she managed to not get fired, how to keep me occupied, put placemats and crayons and pieces of paper in front of me. And then she would let me walk down to the appliance store, which was a block down this little town main street in Winstead, Connecticut, and we didn't have a TV at home, so she would let me go down there. She would take me down there, and at 4 o'clock every day, and I would watch the Woody Woodpecker show that was hosted by the great Walter Lantz. Mm-hmm. And Walter would very often come on and draw the same sorts of ovals that she did, and then show us kids how he made these cartoons with all of these folks that he had working for him. And I would look at that and say, well, this is what I'm going to do.
Wow.
And Walter was a huge influence on me. You know, one of the things when I said the way that Mom framed things, for instance, we couldn't go to the movie house to see Peter Pan. She didn't have the $2. So for 19 cents, she would buy me a Woody Woodpecker coloring book that Walter put out, teaching us how to draw, the easy way to draw, or she would buy the Golden Book of Peter Pan, and she would tell me that once we saw the movie and how beautiful and wonderful that would be, and she would describe the experience of being in the movies, but then she'd say, you know, but Guy, then we'd want to take the movie home with us, and look, we have it right here. And so we would draw the book and read the book, and it would become ours. That's a huge influence on me. Seeing how drawing and reading cartoons first and reading the books first, and then seeing how they were put together, and realizing that I could have a chance to make people happy the way that these things did. That was everything to me. When I was about 10 years old, we had a TV by then, and I was home from school, and Walter Lantz was on the Art Linkletter show. Art Linkletter show was a talk show on in the middle of the day, and they always had an address where he would, you could send, funny stories and things like that. And so now I had an address to write to Walter Lantz. And so I worked very hard for a couple of months, the way I remember it, and sent a bunch of my artwork to him, and he wrote me back.
Ooh.
And I know. I mean, and there was this beautiful full-color, mailing label, and then inside was a letter with Woody all in full color on a little white horse with the big lance, and it said, "Dear Guy, you have a lot of talent for a 10-year-old boy, and you try so hard. And if you never give up, I believe that someday you are going to be a successful cartoonist. Sincerely, Walter Lantz." And oh my gosh, I mean, I was a nothing, and he believed in me, and that meant the world.
Wow.
And that was really the impetus for all of it.
But like you said, you were basically self-taught, or I guess you were taught by the television screen, I suppose, by Walter. But so you had an innate talent, or did you ever go to classes later?
Well, what I wound up doing, Mark, was I got a job as like a paraprofessional, as I guess is what you would call it. When I was about in 5th or 6th grade, we were living in West Hartford, Connecticut, and they had this amazing graphics department in the basement of the high school, and it was like an advertising agency, and they would do work for the Board of Ed. And so I went down there and basically worked for art supplies, and every once in a while got a couple of dollars, but it was mostly art supplies. And so I wound up at 11, 12, 13, 14 years old for several years working in this like ad agency. And so I learned design and got a hold of a camera where I could animate and all of that sort of thing. And so and I was pushed to create a portfolio, and I was really young, but I was pushed to create a portfolio, and I lived within a couple of hours by train from New York City, and so I made portfolios, and I would go to New York, and I went to the very first, or the second, Comic-Con there ever was, a Phil Seuling's Comic-Con in the early to mid-'70s, and started showing my artwork, and I knew, like the song says, if you could make it there, you can make it anywhere.
Right.
It was closer. New York City was closer than L.A. and Hollywood, so I went there, and and I was showing my stuff around, and I started to learn what I needed to do to compete, and so I would go back, and I would buy. Or go to the library and get books on animation from Preston Blair, anatomy from George Bridgman, that sort of thing. And the art teachers that I had all through middle school and high school were incredible, too, because they knew what I wanted to do, and they knew that I was also writing what I was doing. It was always stories, not just art. It was the story. And and so I copied all of my heroes, all the Walters, the Walt Disney artists, Walt Kelly and Walter Lantz, and eventually Arthur Rackham in illustration, all at the same time, copying Dr. Seuss and copying, all of the writers that I really, really liked. And it just kept going. I loved telling stories, making people happy, trying to share stories, share emotions, and all of that through both music and art, and it became everything to me. Mm-hmm. And so it didn't matter how many times I got shut down. When I'd get shut down, I'd ask, well, how can I get better? And then I would listen to that from editors and the guys that I was trying to work for, and then I'd go home and I'd try to get better.
Mm-hmm. And did you get any jobs at the conventions, or just the advice that you're talking about?
I actually, Vaughn Baudet, who was very, to most people, very strange guy. He had a very strange, appearance and lifestyle and all of that. But he had always wanted to be a Disney artist, and he gave me a lot of advice, and he shared with me some contacts at what we used to call undergrounds. Mm-hmm. And also fanzines like the Comic Buyer's Guide and that kind of stuff. And I got work. And, it didn't pay very much, and sometimes it didn't pay at all, even if they said they were going to. But I did get work. And by the time I was 16, I walked into Whitman Publishing, which was the Canadian arm of Western Publishing, Golden Books, and I got a job doing some coloring books for Walt Disney. The name of the man that was the editor there was John Solardo, and John was an amazing editor and artist and writer, and he ghosted many of the King Features stuff out of the bullpen and stuff later on, and I got to work with John when I was doing the Muppets, a few years later, but John gave me jobs writing, basically writing, because there was no writing in them, coloring books for Walt Disney that were focused on the classic characters like Mickey and Goofy and Pluto and that sort of thing, because I've been trying to draw that stuff, and I guess I did it good enough that when he gave me the model sheets, I'm going, hey man, this is like cheating. Right. And I started, of course, I couldn't sign my name to any of that, but I didn't have a problem with that. Walt Kelly couldn't sign his name. Fred Kimball Ward Kimball couldn't sign his name. Frank Thomas, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So I was totally cool with that, and and having gotten a couple of jobs and now working for Walt Disney, wow. I mean, and I was just in the middle of high school, so I was off and running.
Wow. Now, did that transfer into any other work with them, like children's books or comic books or anything else?
It didn't. It didn't because just probably because of me. I couldn't paint at that point. I was starting to teach myself how to paint, and that's where, like, studying Arthur Rackham and all of the great illustrators like Maxwell Parrish and stuff came, and also all the guys that, like Gustav Tengren, who painted Al Dempster, who painted those Golden Books for Disney. Trying to copy them in gouache and acrylics and stuff. I had a knack for that, and eventually, that all did happen. But it also cost a lot of money to go to New York and stay there, for a few weeks, and you couldn't have a regular job if you were doing that. And of course, I was out of the house and I was working, so. My beat really became Connecticut really early on, and I would go to the places that had money, like the insurance companies and stuff, and get work from them. And if I didn't know how to do the processes, not the drawing, but the processes that they needed for printing and everything, I would go back once again to those amazing teachers at the West Hartford school system, Ray Callahan and those guys, and asked them how to do it. And so it was gradual for me. And then a really big thing happened when I was about, just turning 22. I got a job with Weekly Reader Books in Connecticut. They were about the biggest publisher in Connecticut, and I got a job trying out for a thing called Super Colonel Comics, and I was saddled with a flying piece of popcorn, and I'm not even kidding. Okay, not even kidding. They made a superhero out of a piece of popcorn because the name of their book club, it was like a direct mail book club, was called the Popcorn Bag.
Oh,
but
I remember that.
The character, and then I surrounded him with funny animals that were in the sort of the Walt Kelly school, and I created a comic book, and it took off. And I was writing and I was drawing it, and they went from like 25,000 subscribers to 350,000. And that gave me a shot at getting into the National Cartoonist Society and eventually meeting Mort Walker of Beetle Bailey and High and Lowest, a great Mort Walker, a man that is as close to having a father as I'll ever have, sort of discovering me and leading me to Jim Henson and King Feature.
Wow. Now, it says on your little bio here on Wikipedia that you created the comic strip Mud Pie. Was that for Super Colonel itself, or was that something independent of that?
Oh, no, Mud Pie actually began as my first attempt at children's books.
Oh, okay.
I wrote 4 of them and started shopping them around when I was just getting out of high school in New York City, and and I was trying to learn to paint and draw, and just mixing colored pencils and pastels and paints and watercolors, all that stuff, and trying to get a job, and I eventually did. The books, the Mud Pie books, came out. In the early 80s, and they were a big hit. They were with a company called Modern Publishing, which was sort of a bottom-of-the-barrel kind of a promotional publisher, we called them back in the day. It had taken me 5 years to find someone. But then when they came out, they sold millions. By that time, I had assembled a couple of guys that were better than me at painting, and we had a little studio, and I was writing the stuff, drawing the stuff, inking the stuff in color, the way that they did in the old Golden Books, and they were a hit. The comic strip Mud Pie came from based on that, and I had sent that to King Features, had a little bit of interest, but I sent a lot of stuff to King Features, United, Field Syndicate, all of those guys. Never really had a shot, and wasn't ever thinking that I was ever going to reach that, that huge Mount Olympus moment of ever being syndicated. But then Mort Walker kind of took care of that.
And Mort Walker was the one who introduced you to Jim Henson then? Is that what you're saying?
Or
kind of through the grapevine, I guess.
Yeah, he cut right through the grapevine. He was playing golf with Bill Yates, who, the editor-in-chief, the head of King Features. And Bill was lamenting the fact that they had a development deal with Jim to create a comic strip based on The Muppet Show. And they had this deal for 2 years, I guess, and they, between them and Henson Associates, they had tried out, I guess, around 200 different people, or talked with 200 different people, had many people do samples and stuff, and no one had clicked yet. And so King Features was about to lose the development deal, and Mort just said, that's a frog and a pig, right? And Bill says, yeah. He says, well, there's this kid that hangs around the Museum of Cartoon Art. I think he must live in the neighborhood. I didn't. I lived 2 hours away on the poor side of Connecticut, not on the rich side of Connecticut, where Mort did. But I was down there so much, and Mort had become familiar with the Super Colonel comics and my other stuff and Funny Animal stuff that I was doing, and knew that I wrote as well. And so he suggested that Bill call me. And so I tried out best I could, and did half a dozen finished strips in a Sunday probably, and wrote some extra gags and brought them into Bill. He liked them, asked me for more, and I did quite a few. And then eventually I got to go over to, what people now call the Muppet Mansion, but it was Brownstone, 117 East 69th Street, where Michael K. Frith was the creative director, Jim's creative director, and I met everyone there. And this was a world that I had only dreamt about walking into. And Michael was complimentary. They weren't committing to anything. They were also looking at Marie Severin, I found out later, to illustrate it, and she must have had a writer. But they didn't say no. And so for about 9 or 10 months, without getting paid, I just wrote and drew. While I was still doing Super Colonel and all that, I just kept going, because I figured until they told me to stop, I had a shot. And then one day, the phone rang kind of out of the blue, and it was Jerry Jewell, the head writer of the Muppets, and he told me I had the job. But first he said, he started talking about gags and, some ideas he had for some stuff with Gonzo, and I'm like, Mr. Jewell, why are you calling me? And he's like, well, didn't Michael call you? Didn't Jane call you? You had the job for a month.
Oh, wow.
And then I had to sit in my garage studio in Unionville, Connecticut, and talk for 2 hours to the head writer of the Muppets, and write stuff down and just start in a conversation where I'm freaking out. I'm absolutely gone. But I have to act like I'm an adult. And this happens all the time. Because Jerry was so funny. It was like, I'm going, wait a minute. So this is Jerry Jewell, Juhl, like in The Crawl, like at the end of the show. And he's like, excuse me, boy, but I'm a very famous Hollywood writer, and I don't have time for this. And then he'd laugh. He knew what was going on, but we had work to do.
Right.
And this was early in '81, and then a couple of months later, Jim took a break from making the Great Muppet Caper over in London, and flew in on the Concorde to talk with me and to basically put his stamp of approval on me being Jim's first cartoonist.
Wow.
So thank you, Mort Walker, for everything. Everything.
Now, prior to all this, did you... I assume you saw the Muppets because, they were pretty prominent, but were you ever thinking of drawing those as characters or anything like that, or was that your first stab at it, as it were?
Yeah, that was my first shot. There was no art of the Muppets except for the Sesame Street books. Sesame Street started in '69.
Right.
So I could go to the bookstore and look at Sesame Street books. A lot of them drawn by Michael K. Frith,
right.
Who was my boss.
Mm-hmm.
But there was nothing on the Muppets. There was no Muppet Show anything.
Yeah.
But I could look at. So, there was this whole thing, Mark, with, okay, these characters are full color, and there's music, and there's sound, and there's these incredible voices and incredible, guest stars and everything. And how are we going to take this huge symphony orchestra and put it into the tiny little telephone booth that was, a black and white comic strip, a little tiny panel? This was all in my head. But the one thing that, so I had to try in my own way to take those puppets and turn them into, characters, cartoon characters. And I had huge help from Michael, who was the only person that was doing this. Mm-hmm. And there were several other artists, but they were in-house, and that stuff I had not had a chance to ever see. Mm-hmm. But with Michael's patience and Jim, oh my gosh, Jim's really the one where the light bulb truly went off, because Michael was having me draw them very, very close to what the puppets look like. Mm-hmm. And they even had a style guide for in-house on how the puppets were constructed and stuff. And, of course, that was a huge help once they gave that to me, which was way, way, way down the line when I got hired. Mm-hmm. But when Jim came in on that Saturday, and I sat with him in his office, and he started telling me, he said, a lot of your drawings are good, and some of them are even great, but we want wonderful. And then he lifted his right hand, and without the puppet on there, he introduced me to Kermit. And he started talking, and of course Jim was a really great artist, went to art school and everything. Mm-hmm. And then he, on a piece of paper, drew his hand and put Kermit's eyes on them. And what this did was it showed me that they were alive, that life was going through them, and also that, that to get that feeling, we had to exaggerate. And and it all started clicking for me. The first year that the strip came out, because of the way that it was structured, and I should just explain the structuring of the strip. All comic strips back then were done about 6 to 8 weeks in advance and about 12 weeks on the Sunday. Mm-hmm. And they would be printed here in the United States and then eventually translated into French and Spanish, and then the paper proofs would be sent around the world, and if they needed to, put them into different languages, they would, as they were sold, and then the strips would come out that way in reprint form being translated. Well, Jim wouldn't have any of that. And King Features was saying, yeah, but Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and da-da-da. And he's like, no, I don't care. He cared very much. He didn't care about the structuring. He believed that the Muppets belonged to the whole world, and he wanted the same joke that we read here in the United States to also be read in Helsinki or Hong Kong or wherever, that the same joke, the same day. And they were like, you can't do this. Well, he just said, well, I think we can. Mm-hmm. And then went off to make a movie and left Michael and I with King Features to discuss this. And the upshot of the whole thing was that I really had to be about a year ahead.
Oh, boy.
And so I was working my tail off. And if you look at reprints and stuff of the first year of the strip, the characters changed dynamically as I'm learning, that I need to exaggerate more and I can animate them more. And Michael was learning. We were all learning. There really was no line art before I started.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was doing the strip, a lot of stuff came out. The merchandising all came out and all of that. And so I was literally working 24/7, not sleeping at all, because by the time the strip came out in the middle of September of '81, I really almost had to be a year ahead.
Wow.
So I was probably a couple 250 strips in by the time you saw the first ones in the paper.
Wow. Now, who is Brad Gilchrist? Is that your brother or something, or who is that?
Yeah, Brad's my younger brother,
Okay.
and I had Brad was working with me part-time when I was doing Super Colonel. He was still in high school, and and he wanted to do what I did. And so I brought him on board as my very first assistant, helping me color and write some jokes and stuff. So when I was contacted on the Muppets, of course I kept Brad on, to do the same thing, to help me write material for the strip and also help me color the Sunday pages.
Did you split duties, or did you basically wrote and drew it and he did the coloring, like you're saying?
Well, he wrote some gags.
Oh, okay.
And he's a really good writer. He became a very good writer. And I wrote half of them, and then he wrote the other half. And depending on what my workload was, in the other part of the Muppet universe was all of it, besides production. Sometimes Brad would, write almost, probably 75% or 80% of the gags some months, because I was so incredibly busy also, besides writing the strip and making sure the strip got out, I became like the editor as well, because we also had Muppet Show artwork that we were putting out based on the strip. And then, of course, within a year or two of that, Fraggle Rock happened, and then the Muppet Babies. And oh my gosh, and oh my gosh again. So Brad was always a great fail-safe, to be around, and he became a really good colorist as well, and worked with me on painting all of the books and the merchandise and all of that stuff, and he was really invaluable, to have around, especially early on when the world sort of showed up. Everything that I wanted happened, that I was like, how am I going to do all of this?
So,
it's amazing when your dream, your goal, first you have a dream, and then you decide, well, a dream's not worth much, unless it's a goal, and you have a plan. Well, when the goal and the plan all click, it's really there. Well, then it's like, well, you better dance fast, and you better dance real good, because it's all here. And it's amazing, and I was still really a young guy, and it wasn't like if I blew it and, made mistakes or missed a deadline or something, the world wouldn't know about it. It was like, no, 70 million people are going to know,
Yeah.
We all make mistakes, but mine were in the spotlight, still are. Now they're in antique shops and in comic book shops and all of that, and everyone can go see Guy grow up right in front of them.
Now, did you work on other Muppet things? I think you kind of alluded to that. So did you work on books or any comics about Fraggle Rock and even the movie tie-ins and things like that?
Yeah. Well, I didn't work on comic books because comic books, that whole thing, remember, I was doing a comic strip every single day, and that was, really a full-time job unless you're nuts, and I was nuts. And also, Jim really liked how I drew, and I understood characters very well, and so very early on in development of things like Fraggle Rock, and then very early on in the Muppet Babies, I was brought on board. Michael drew in pencil because he didn't have time to do the other stuff. He was designing, he was doing this. He really, when you watch a Jim Henson production, Michael Fritz's name comes right afterwards, and that's because it should.
Yeah.
And so Michael always just said, use that magic brush that you have, and and fax machines had been invented, so he was sending me faxes of pencil drawings of the Fraggles, for instance, and saying, okay, draw them, paint them, and for every product that I possibly could. And then with the Babies, it was, let's see your take on, because I was doing all the Muppets as cartoons every day. Let's see your take on all of the characters as babies. And so that was very, very early on. So yes, I was working on story arcs and, with the characters for the whole universe, which would be passed on from the television production and movie productions to the animators, to the book illustrators, to the toy manufacturers, to all of that. And then I would do as much of that as I possibly could. Normally, that would wind up being merchandise. And lots of merchandise. Because again, I couldn't illustrate entire full-color books because I was too busy with everything else. I really was like Michael's right-hand man, and and so I was kind of all over the place. So I painted a lot of the products and stuff that y'all see, and got when you were kids. I did do the coloring books, however, because that was something, okay, I can draw this just like I'm doing the comics, ink it just like I do the comics, and I can also move the story forward without, taking the month or 2 months out of my life and paint the book. I painted a lot of covers and stuff too, for things that I didn't do the insides of.
So, I guess you had the experience previously of the other coloring books, so it just was natural, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, and coloring books were very much like like a comic strip, the black and white.
And so Muppets as a comic strip ended in '86, I believe, and was it just because it just ran its course? It seemed like it was still pretty popular, or were you just burned out? What happened then?
No. Well, what was going on was, no, I wasn't burned out. I had a lot of irons in the fire, and I had made up a comic panel of the Babies, and drew that, wrote that up myself, and everyone within Henson Associates really liked it. And then I also wrote and drew a couple of months of a Fraggle Rock comic. And then when Muppets Christmas came out, Jim had all the characters together, the light went off. You see, one of the things that was problematic with King Features, and for your listeners and everything, you'll have to go back to a time that maybe you weren't even around, but you couldn't binge comics online. Okay, so King Features didn't want stories. They also didn't want us to just break into the strip with Muppets News Flash and stuff like that, and so so I and the days of the story strip like Pogo were gone, and gag-a-day strips like Beetle Bailey and Blondie ruled the roost, and they wanted that to be the Muppets. Well, that really wasn't the Muppets. I tried really hard to please both King Features, myself, and my own creative thinking, but mostly Jim. And we did some really wacky and fun stuff. But once I wrote that Fraggle Rock thing, I said, gee whiz, this is us. This is how it ought to be, because it was a story, and it was sort of a fable. And I said, I could do this. And we brought it to King, and King really liked all of it. But they did not want to mess with a real successful formula. And my contract was up, 5-year contract, and I was already, 6 months or something into the next year, working without a contract. And so, creative differences, found their way into this stuff, as sometimes happens. And so that was really, unfortunately, the end. I had been thinking all the way through, not really thinking about sales, but thinking about the creative, that we could just morph one into the other, and have a comic that had all of Jim's characters in it, and we could bop around the way that my brain did, the way that my heart did, but that commercially that wasn't where King was at. Yeah. So that's kind of what happened.
I'm surprised, but you probably didn't have any input one way or the other. I'm just kind of surprised they didn't continue with another artist or something like that, or writer.
Well, Jim had given me one of the most amazing days of my life. Was a few years in, less than 2 years into the strip. There was a huge approval process that had to go on that was very problematic, because King Features was used to, approving all of the gags and that sort of thing. But then we also had Frank Oz, Jim, Michael, and Jerry Jewell approving all the gags too. So it could take months sometimes, for approvals to happen. And King's tearing their hair out, and I'm, trying to make deadlines and stuff. And so Jim asked me to come up to Toronto, where they were filming a Miss Piggy special at Channel 9 in Toronto, big studio, and they also were doing Fraggle Rock there. It was the first year or so of Fraggle Rock. And Jim came in for this meeting with me and just took my hands into his hands and said, you know the characters just as well as I do. The characters are yours. The strip is yours. It always has been. You go do what you're going to do. And I'm going to tear up thinking about it. It was huge. And so for those 5 years or something that I was doing it, Jim was seeing it all and commenting on all of it, but I was doing it. And Jim felt very strongly that this was mine, as much mine as it was his. And so when things started breaking down, Jim and I looked for other people to work with me on it. But, we had this commercial problem. And Jim just said, no, if it's going to end, it's going to end. This is yours. And I haven't really talked about that really publicly ever. It was a huge, huge thing.
Yeah.
And when I would be in his office after that, the last Sunday page that I did, that I think people can see online, where Kermit is closing the theater after the show and walking away, that tomorrow, we'll start another show, was the goodbye. And in Jim's office, on his walls, he had all of his greatest achievements. And they were, the biggest achievements there are. And on his wall, he had that original. And when they did the Muppet celebration, Jim, Dave Goles, actually, because he was Gonzo, talked about, in the Muppet universe, talking about all the movies and the shows and everything like that, and they talked about the comic strip, and showed a sample of the comic. It was mine, and if I couldn't make it work, and Jim understood why I was trying to make it work the way I was. If we weren't going to, do it creatively the way that we really should, then I guess it's goodbye.
Now, was that your last working with the Muppets, or did you do other things after this trip with them?
Oh, no. I continued, on the Muppets and the Babies and all of that, to one extent of another until Jim passed. Mm-hmm.
And I guess since you mentioned that, after he passed, did everything change? I mean, that they just... did you not want to work for them anymore, or did they not want people working for them?
No. Well, as the last couple of years, Jim really wasn't, in New York very much. Mm-hmm. The structure of the company had kind of changed, because he's filming a lot in London, and also in Canada. And, I was always outside of Hanson Associates. I was never an employee. I was, an employee of King, and then also a freelancer, subcontractor of Hanson Associates. And so as there was less call, for the Babies, and less call for the Muppets, because there was so much artwork that was being used and reused and all of that. Mm-hmm. And I was already onto, many other things by the time Jim passed. And although we would get together, we would get together and as friends, and I was doing stuff here and there. It wasn't the day to day any longer. And once and a lot of the artists that I had been working with had been let go from Henson Associates by the time Jim passed as well. And were working as freelancers the way that I was. So when Jim passed, very very soon after, Michael left Henson and went on to create Between the Lines and other things that were totally Michael. Along with his friend Chris Surf. God bless Chris Surf too. These are guys that just I can't believe that they're my friends, and I got to work with these guys. So by the time Jim passed, and new folks came on board and everything like that, they had their own things that they wanted to do, and they had their own people that they wanted to work with. And I was so busy with my own characters, the Tiny Dinos and Mud Pie, through, starting in 87 and 88, and also Warner Brothers. Oh my gosh. I mean, lots of Looney Tunes. So much stuff. I was, just doing so many other things, Tom and Jerry, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and stuff, that I would drop everything, to do any Muppet related thing. It's just that there wasn't that much.
Good. We will be back after this message.
Hi, I'm George Takei. You know me as Helmsman Sulu on Star Trek. When I'm not busy going Warp Factor 8, I like to beam down to Lee's Comics in Mountain View and spend a lazy afternoon reading comics classics from Marvel to DC, from Dark Horse to Fantagraphics, and everything in between. So please, spend some time here at Lee's Comics and spend your hard-earned cash.
The Fun
Fun Ideas podcast is made possible by listeners like you and from Lee's Comics of California, selling you what your mother threw out since 1982, online at leescomics.com. And now back to the Fun Ideas podcast. Well, I do know as a fan that, things are changing, that even if Henson survived, it might have been dramatically different, because he was selling it to Disney, and he was kind of moving away from like the Kermit, Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear type characters to more like dramatic, realistic Muppets like the Storyteller and Dark Crystal and things like that. So,
Well, he that was always on his mind, but he was never going to leave Kermit and Piggy behind. Mm-hmm. And I kind of know, because we talked about this a lot. Michael, myself, Jim Mahan, and Jim, that Jim Henson, because I don't want to mix the Jims up. There's Jim Mahan too, and Jim and I did so much stuff together. He's a Henson guy. Jim Henson really looked up to Walt Disney and loved how the Disney characters stayed on in perpetuity and were alive for everyone after Walt passed. Mm-hmm. And so, his last production, Muppet production, was Muppet Vision, Muppet Vision 3D.
Right.
And and was in the process of working out, an agreement where the Muppets would be represented, at Disneyland and Disney World, so that they would always, be there, no matter what. But remember, the last Muppet production was pretty close to when he passed. He had no intention, of ever abandoning, Kermit and Rolf the dog, and that's his heart, Mm-hmm. But being the visionary that he was, and the just the constantly changing artist, he wanted to continue to move the art form of puppetry forward.
Right, which is just like Walt did, Walt Disney. So, because Walt didn't stick with Mickey Mouse, he eventually went into feature films and live action and TV shows and the Disneyland and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Very much the same thing, Mark. Yeah. Very, very much the same thing. When you're a creative guy or girl, you're you have something that is so beloved. Mm-hmm. You're always going to do that because that's the horse you rode in on, and all of your youthful hopes and dreams and everything are with those characters, and you're always going to do those characters, but creatively, you're wanting to push yourself. You're not wanting to stay in the same place. None of us do.
Right. And I can even speak for myself. I mean, I used to just do writing, and now I'm doing this podcast, things like that. Yes, so trying to explain.
Yeah, but the whole thing of selling the Muppets and everything to Disney, that was Jane, mm-hmm. And the family. I don't know if Jim had stayed with us. If that would have been the case. We'll never know.
Right. So I was going to move on to Nancy, but I wanted to know what you did between Muppets and Nancy. It sounds like you did quite a bit, so if you can touch on a few projects you work on. You mentioned Warner Brothers and Looney Tunes and things like that. So were you just doing various freelance things over those years?
Well, the main thing that I did right out of the box was... I sold a property I had a property called Tiny Dinos, mm-hmm. and it was a book and toy property that was eventually going to become a CBS television show. That part never happened, but the other stuff certainly did, and we sold millions of copies of the Tiny Dinos books, and that was in the mid to late 80s, like 87, 88, 89. And, and children's books was just a wonderful place for me. And, and I loved paint, and I loved telling stories. And, and being a dad myself, this had always really been my dream. Mm-hmm. And so I was doing an awful lot of that, the Mud Pie books and the Tiny Dino books, and they were really selling well. And my connection with Warner Brothers, starting in about 85, came from Warner Brothers decided that they wanted to compete with Disney in amusement parks. And so I got a phone call sometime in the mid-'80s saying, hey, Bob Clampett, and you've done some work, for Chuck Jones. Well, you ever draw Bugs Bunny? Well, I can. Okay, let's see if you can. And I did, and submitted it, and then they started explaining to me the licensing group, LCA. That's licensing for Warner Brothers in New York. They started explaining what they were planning on doing, which became Six Flags. Mm-hmm. And so I was doing drawings, connecting the characters to different rides and all of that, and then again doing like coloring books and stuff of the characters. And they really liked what I was doing, and then they asked me to fly out to L.A. and possibly move to L.A., which I kiboshed. I said, nah, my kids are cool, nah, I'm not going to do that. But I did go out, and Robert McKimson had passed away, of course, quite a bit before this, but Robert's crew was still around. There was no animation department except for those guys in-house. Mm-hmm. I went out and trained with Bob, Robert McKimson's assistant, and his crew, and learned how to draw the characters, and then came back to the East Coast and became the guy to draw Looney Tunes, and that manifested itself in like the 50th anniversary birthday of Bugs Bunny and stuff. Mm-hmm. The late 80s, we did the thing called Looney Tunes Library, and with Walden Books, I think it was, and I toured that and all of that, and we did just gazillions of books where we were taking all of the 7-minute shorts and then turning them into books of Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner and Boggle and Leghorn and Tweety and Sylvester and all of that. And these were all full-color airbrushed books, and they were hugely successful. And the Tiny Toons was happening at the same time. I wound up doing that. Mm-hmm. Isabel Miller, who had been the head of licensing at Henson, went to work for Ted Turner when Ted Turner bought MGM, and then she brought Tom and Jerry to me, and I ran Tom and Jerry licensing and merchandising and all of that, and created new style sheets, model sheets and style guide and all of that based on all of the original stuff that had been lost over the years. So I was doing an awful lot. And the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles showed up, and that was fun. So I was doing all of that. And also my own characters, the Dinos, had found success in all places, Tokyo. And so I went to Tokyo and did some work over there, wound up creating the mascot for the Olympics over there for soccer, and came back, and now I was all of a sudden doing sports mascots and stuff, and I wound up working with Major League Baseball, and I was doing all of this stuff, and then the phone call came in about Nancy. So I was pretty busy. I don't know, about like 40 books, and, 5 or 6 television shows, and a couple of movies, and, just kind of kicking it around.
Yeah.
I always say, you know, I'm the bozo in the room. You know, I was always around.
Yeah.
And I drew fairly fast, and I guess pretty good. And because I'm a writer, I always delve into the personalities of the characters and the universe itself, and then try to find my place in it. And so I didn't miss deadlines, and I would just hire more people. You know, the more things that we were taking on that I really loved, so that we could do all of these things. How are you going to say no? I on the phone, said, can you draw Tom and Jerry? I said, well, how long do I have? you know what? Oh, I'll tell you a really funny story.
Okay.
So this is how Ted Turner bought MGM. Okay. So Isabel calls me up and says, hey, Guy, I'm not working for Jim anymore. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, everything okay? She said, oh, no, it's great. She said, but I got this offer from Ted Turner. Now, this is the late 80s. You know, there's no Turner anything.
Right.
They had just started, like, CNN and stuff. But what we knew about, you know, him at the time was, you know, he was buying a lot of things, and he bought the Atlanta Braves and stuff, you know. And, you know, he's sailing and things like that. And he seemed like a super cool guy. And, you know, he had a television station. But anyway, she said, hey, so Ted bought MGM. And I'm like, oh, like, you mean like MGM Grand, like the casino and the airline and stuff like that? He's like, no, MGM. I went, what? He says, yeah. He called MGM and wanted to buy Gone with the Wind.
Yeah.
And they said, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Turner, but, you know, you can't buy that. We own that. That's part of our, you know, classic film library. And he says, no, wait a minute. You own it, right? Yeah. I want to buy it. It's my favorite movie. How much you want for it? And they wouldn't sell it to him. So he hung up the phone, called his guy, and said, go buy MGM.
Wow.
Because he wanted to own Gone with the Wind. and he got it. And so then he hired Isabel to, you know, run the licensing for Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz and all of those wonderful movies. And what they also got in the package was Tom and Jerry. And Tom and Jerry and Spike and Tyke and Droopy and everything had kind of been discarded here in this country. They weren't running on TV anymore. And the cartoons, I think, had been being done over in Eastern Europe. And so when they got it, of course, you know, he had a television station and stuff, and he's like, well, let's put Tom and Jerry on, and but they didn't have any model sheets, any style, anything. So when Isabel called me, she said, how fast can you do this? And I'm like, I'm on it. And I mean, it fell in my lap. It was like, can you draw this stuff? And I'm like, I don't know, but I'm going to give it a really good shot. And, you know, and that was kind of how it went, you know, with me. I mean, you know, Looney Tunes. It was like, can you draw Bugs Bunny?
Yeah.
I think so. You know, let me try. And, you know, thank you. You know, thank you very, very much, you know, for trusting me.
Yeah.
And, of course, I wouldn't send in anything until I felt like it was the very, very best that I could do. And it worked out.
Now, if this is a question coming up from all this, is there any characters you had difficult drawing or couldn't draw?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's actually a, well, yeah. I was never good at like superhero.
Okay.
Characters. You know, which is why I think the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was perfect for me. Because, you know, they were kind of Bigfoot, you know, is what we call them.
Yeah.
You know, they were more animated. And, of course, my version was way more animated than the really dark way that their origin was.
Mm-hmm.
But the segue that I was going to get into was when I got the call for Nancy.
Mm-hmm.
So David Hendon, who was then my agent for children's books,
Mm-hmm.
And had run United Features, who owned Nancy, he called me up and he said, "Hey, Jerry Scott is leaving Nancy,"
Mm-hmm.
and because he had just sold his second strip, which was Zits, and he was already doing Baby Blues. He was writing, and he had different artists doing the strips.
Mm-hmm.
But he had been doing Nancy for like 8 or 9 years.
Yeah.
And they wanted someone to bring back the Ernie Bushmiller sort of Nancy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, David, I'm not that guy. I mean, that. That's all pen and stuff, and you need a ruler, and I don't know. He goes, "Well, you know it, right?" Yeah. "Well, can't you try it?" And I'm going, "I don't think so, David. It doesn't stuck really up my alley." And so anyway, we got off the phone, and I had some reprinted proof sheets in my files
Mm-hmm.
of Nancy. And so I tried to draw and ink them, and I was terrible at it. And I'm like, now I'm getting mad. I'm like, I kept trying, and it wasn't looking right. I'm going, hey, you draw Disney, you draw Warner Brothers, you draw, Hanna-Barbera. You can't draw these characters? Are you kidding? Come on. This is all my inner dialogue, and I'm all by myself. And so for about a week, that's all I did. I started like anybody else would. I just started tracing them. I blew them up on the copier, and I started tracing them, going like, I'm going to figure this out. How do you turn this around? Let's do a turnaround. Let's do this. Let's do that. So I started in, and about a week later, I called David, and I said, "Hey, David, I got 6 dailies and a Sunday page for that Nancy and Sluggo project." He goes, "I thought you weren't going to do it." And I said, "Well, when I found out I couldn't do it, that's when I tried." He goes, "I don't believe you." He says, "Hang on a minute." He calls United, and he says, "Well, nice work, genius. They already got somebody." And I went, "Oh, okay." And he said, "But do me a favor, send it over, because I'd like to see what you did, and I'd like to show them that maybe, you could do that style." He says, "Is it any good?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, but I tried." And anyway, he said, "Okay, well, FedEx them to me." I FedExed them to him. The next day, he got an appointment with United. He called me up 5 minutes later. He says, "You got the job."
Oh, wow.
I don't know who this other guy was. He says, "But they gave you the job."
Yeah.
He said, they really like it. He said, by the way, I got a contract here, and you got to sign it. I'm FedExing it to you because we're right on deadline, and those are going to run in the paper. I'm like, what?
Wow.
I thought I'd have like 6 months or something. No. They were like, right on deadline. And so I started.
Huh.
But that was Nancy was the thing that drove me up a wall that I couldn't draw. Yeah.
And, of course, then you continued to do it for quite a long time, till pretty recently. I mean,
20, almost 23 years.
Yeah. And I never knew why you left the strip. Was it your choice, or was it chosen for you?
Well, a little of both.
Okay.
The main reason that I left was for about 5 years. For about the last 5 years I was doing it, I was trying to find assistants to help me with it. I had used, assistants here and there because, you can't do 365, plus write children's books and everything else. And I had a really heavy schedule. But unbeknownst to me, all I knew was I had a really bad back. That's all I knew. and that my knees were not good. And but what it turned out was that I had a back disease, and it won't go away. It's called spinal stenosis, and what it was doing was it was disintegrating my discs and paralyzing me. And that's exactly as scary as it sounds.
Yeah.
And so I was having a lot of difficulty with the deadlines, and I didn't really want to quit, although part of me did, because I've been doing it for so long, longer than I had done any other project.
Right.
But the day-to-day production was just something that, if I could have had 6 months off to a year, had somebody else do it or something, and then come back to it after the doctors had successfully done the surgery, which happened in May, and everything is great. I mean, I'll never have my discs back or anything like that, but I'm back to pretty much where I would like to be at 62 years old, working every single day. But those last couple of years on the strip, as things got worse and worse and worse, it was a very difficult thing for me to do. So it was a mutual decision.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I just figured I'd ask you directly, because I hear things, the rumor mill goes on around. It's like, oh, there was a falling out or something, I didn't know, it's like I was just curious, now. If I had been, Universal, and I had the greatest editors, just the greatest editors, and they're all so respectful and so wonderful to work with, but I was having a real tough time, hanging on to the deadlines. And they did really what they had to do. So that brings us to the present. I assume you're still working on various projects, just not a daily comic strip. So what are you doing currently?
Well, this past year, I wrote and illustrated a coloring book.
Hey!
Coming back to coloring books, I never realized that was the common thread. But anyway, I created a character named Buddha Bear, a company called Backpack Buddha, that I just kind of fell in love with online. I loved what they were doing. They were giving a percentage of everything that they were making to impoverished children and villages and stuff, and I was like, wow, I really like these guys. They reached out to me and said, gee, would you like to do something with us? And so I created a brand new universe of characters, Buddha Bear and then all of his friends, and we put that book out in a plush, and that came out late last year, and has really blossomed this year. And I'm also co-writing and illustrating a book for publication next year called Mythological Creatures Make Bad Pets. And this is just going back again to my children's book roots, and and I love drawing dragons and griffins and all that kind of stuff, and so it's a lot of fun. And then there are two other book projects: a superhero character and a project that we're doing on spec for television and books about the human body and trying to explain the human body to children. And it's a blast. Creating characters for that. And literally, the minute that I basically came out of surgery at the beginning of May, there have been all of these projects just sort of dropped in my lap, and I'm having an absolute blast.
Yay.
The other thing, too, is one of the reasons that walking away from Nancy was okay with me was that, I had made a promise to Jim a very long time ago, almost 40 years ago now, it's hard to say, that I was his cartoonist.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, I hadn't, been doing a lot of that with everything else that I was doing. And so I felt like, being freed up a little bit, I'd be able to return to that a little bit. And so I've been on tour a lot, going to Comic-Cons and doing motivational speaking and screenings of the Muppet movies and things like that, and doing Q&As, and revisiting all of those wonderful characters that are still so alive, in my head and in my right hand. And I'm absolutely loving that. There aren't too many of us around, and that worked very closely with Jim,
Right.
that are out there visiting with folks. And when you're in production and chained to a table, a drawing table, or chained to a sound stage, you can't do that sort of stuff. And because you're busy, you have deadlines, you have a television show, you have a comic strip, you have the products, you have whatever. And so now I can do that. And Carol Spinney, God bless Carol and Deb. Carol just retired 2 weeks ago from doing public appearances for the foreseeable future, anyway. And so Steve Whitmire is touring as well, and I'm touring, and it's some of the voices of the babies and stuff like that are touring as well. But there are only a couple of us that worked with Jim all the time, and we can get out there because it's wonderful that the characters that Jim created, Jim's characters are around in perpetuity. But I think that maybe even more important is that Jim's character, his personality, his love for everyone, his kindness, his patience, that's perpetuated, and that we can reach out and we can shake hands and we can hug, and while I've been so busy at the drawing table, you all grew up. And you're in your 40s now, and you have children of your own, and you can't meet Jim except, and you can't know him, but you can know him through what he gave us. But you can come by and say hi to me, and I can tell you stories, and and the same is with Steve. You can talk to Steve, and Steve can tell you some stories. And especially in this time of social media and with the political climate out there, where we're all so polarized, and we're being torn apart. And as somebody just like Jim, that grew up. Well, Jim grew up in the 50s, and then really hit it in the late 60s, and I'm a decade beyond that. But I lived through, the Vietnam War and the protests, and Martin Luther King and everything that he tried to do to bring us all together, and the kindness and the love and compassion that comes through in every Jim Henson property, and I hope in all of mine. It's so important to be out there. It's so important that that we try to understand each other, and try to find love, forgiveness, and compassion, and equality inequality in all of us. And just because on social media you can broadcast your feelings, you can publish your feelings, and there's this polarization that blows my mind, and the perpetuation also of 24/7, 3,000 channels, and all of that. We need to come together, and Muppets is as good a way of bringing us together as any.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm glad I'm there, and no matter where I go, and in the last 2 weeks, I mean, gosh, I was just in San Antonio for Alamo City. I love those guys. I was 2 hours or so or less from Mexico. And this past weekend, I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is just, a bridge drive to Canada. And you wouldn't think that, gosh, if you just thought of it on the surface, that's a whole country away from each other. But you know what? Everybody loves the Muppets.
Yeah.
Everybody loves the Muppets, and everyone is struggling with these things that I was just talking about, and wanting us to come together.
Yeah.
And so I see it, and I get to see it now all the time. When I'm on tour, and the love that's out there for all of these wonderful characters that I've had a small part in is just I treasure it.
Right. And I'm glad you're doing that. I'm glad things you're not doing, but also keep the Muppets in the public eye. I just bought a DVD yesterday. Is 50 years and counting, and it's like the best Sesame Street skits with Muppets for 50 years. So it's like everybody's doing their part, which is great. They're not forgotten. So, and Jim's not forgotten. So.
Oh, we had such a fun time. I saw Carol at the end of February. We did a reunion in Detroit at Great Lakes Comic Con with myself, Carol, and Bob, and quite a few of the guys from Sesame Street. And what was really, really fun too was Mr. Speedy Delivery from Mr. Rogers was there as well.
Wow.
And we were all able to be in a row, kind of representing kindness.
Yeah.
And that was mind-blowing. And, I've known Carol. Carol and I met at Jim's Christmas party at 117 East 69th in 81.
Wow.
And Carol, many people know that Carol is an amazing Renaissance man. He's a great illustrator and cartoonist, as well as everything else. And so he immediately came over and introduced himself, and of course I was blown away. And we exchanged drawings and stuff, and then we kept on doing that throughout all of these years. And so it was great to be with him again. And had it not been, for the Comic-Cons, he and I might not, have been seeing each other, because I moved from Connecticut, almost 15 years ago now, to Nashville, and he's still in Woodstock. And so, and 117's not there. It's there, but it's not Henson anymore, and they're out in California.
Right.
So we wouldn't have been seeing each other, but we were able to have a reunion pretty much every year, on tour, and now it's up to me to get to his farm.
Yeah. I met Carol at a show a few years ago, and he was a sweetheart, so,
Oh, I know. Nobody better, man.
Yeah.
Nobody better.
Yeah. Well, I guess that kind of wraps things up. What projects do you want to plug? What websites do you want to plug? How do people contact you? What do you want to say?
we've got a great website called A Guy Gilchrist Production. Mm-hmm. I named it that, A Guy Gilchrist Production, because of Walter Lantz. A Walter Lantz Production, and that's the website, and that's also the Facebook page. And you can reach me at both of those. And then also, I'm very, and I'm on social media with Instagram and Twitter and stuff. And if you look my name up, it's Guy F. for Francis Gilchrist, Guy F. Gilchrist. I think it's just Guy Gilchrist on Twitter. But anyway, come and say hi and see how full of artwork my dude, if you could ever see this giant drawing board I have, it's like 5 by 6, this huge board, and then I've got about 12 inches by 12 inches or something like that, where I can put the piece of paper, because of all of the projects and all of the art supplies and everything that are just piled up over here, and coffee cups, of course. So yeah, please, get in touch with me there, and if you go to either the website or the Facebook page, right there where you come in, you'll see the tour schedule, where I'm going to be, and I'm always going to be somewhere.
So you make it out to West Coast as well as all over the nation?
Yeah, I was. Let's see. I was just in L.A. At Comic-Con L.A. About a month or so ago. Oh my gosh, there were like 90,000 people there or something. And wow, and wow again. And gosh, you know what I got to meet in San Jose in August? That was actually my first con after I had the operation. And able to, move around and travel again. I flew out to San Jose and did Silicon Valley Comic-Con, and it was really cool. I met Steve Wozniak.
Wow.
Yeah, that was neat.
I've met him too, actually.
Isn't he a cool guy?
Yes. San Jose. I used to live in San Jose, so that's my area. In fact, I was at that show, but unfortunately couldn't talk to you because I was busy working myself, so I didn't have a chance to get around.
Well, Mark, and I'll tell you, we were about 3 deep for 3 days.
Yeah.
At that show. But and that's kind of the one bummer. The one bummer is that unless we schedule a dinner or something after those cons at night, I don't get to hang, and we don't get to hang together,
right?
Because you really are there for the fans, and and certainly, I mean, I wind up telling stories and doing the panels and everything, but really, if you're at my booth, it's a panel.
Yeah.
And I'm just gabbing. You can tell I'm very, very, introverted, and you can't get since you've got 5 words in this whole time that we've been talking.
Well, I like to let my guests talk. People like that. It's like, if you're saying something interesting, why interrupt? But I will say a Wozniak story. I will interrupt here. When I met Wozniak, I met him actually at the shows before too that we're talking about. But first time I met him, San Jose used to have these free concerts during the summer about a decade or two ago. For about 10 or 15 years now. They don't have them anymore. But one time I was at one of them, and there was this guy zipping around on a Segway, and I said, "Is that Steve Wozniak?" And so we went over and talked to him, and we got his autograph, and he was just there, just kind of observing what's going on,
Yeah. I was on my way to the green room.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on my way to the green room, and I'm walking by, some people, I don't even know what Steve Wozniak looks like. And, but I heard Woz, and I stopped, and kind of waited my turn, and I don't even know if I got my coffee and my sandwich, but, I just, said hello to him, and he's a huge Muppets fan, and very glad that he, knew of me and knew my work and everything, and just a regular guy, just a regular guy who happens to be like this genius.
Mm-hmm.
I've found over the years in all of the circles that I've been in, whether it's the arts or movies and TV and stuff, or music, whatever it is, when you eventually do start, you meet somebody and you start chatting, and they're at the top of their field.
Mm-hmm.
They're just the coolest people to hang with.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Not because of their accomplishments. That goes, you've already read their Wikipedia page or whatever.
Right.
It's just like just how comfortable they are, and what a wonderful, kind heart they have for everyone. And I hope I get a chance to get to know him a little bit better.
Okay. And hopefully the next time you're out to a West Coast show that I happen to be at too, I can make the effort to at least say hi. It's like I wasn't able to the last time. So, but because every time I saw your table, you weren't there. That's why I was like,
Oh.
Then I had to get back to my table. I was working for Lee's Comics table. It was totally across the room, so I couldn't get away very easily. So I said, "Oh well, I guess I'll talk to him next time or later." It's like,
Yeah, well, that one thing that the days are very long,
yeah.
and the one thing that, and I'm there the entire time,
mm-hmm.
but once every hour or so, because of my back. I have to get up and walk.
Yeah.
For 10 minutes, and then I come back to the table.
Yeah.
And but that's why Tiffany is there.
Okay.
The folks that Tiffany's wonderful. She helps me at almost all the shows.
Okay.
And they're there. Hey, where's Guy? Oh, he'll be right back.
Okay.
You just walk.
Well, now that I know that, I will keep that in mind for next time. So, because I assume you're coming out to the West Coast again, either the Bay Area or up north, Washington, Oregon, or Southern California.
I guarantee it.
Okay.
I guarantee it. I believe that I'll be back. Both at Silicon Valley and also L.A.
Okay.
And I've been really trying to get to Portland.
Okay.
For the for that con, and we'll see if they connect. The one thing with cons is that if folks want me to be at a con or something, reach out to the convention and say, gee, I'd like to have Guy here,
mm-hmm.
Because that's the only way really that these things happen.
Right.
Is that either we reach out or they reach out, and then we have to try to schedule. For instance, I just did Grand Rapids Comic-Con. By the way, if anybody ever is, there, anywhere near Grand Rapids, you ought to go to that con. It's a great one.
Okay.
But anyway, I've been trying to work things out schedule-wise with them for a couple of years, and we finally, got it on the third try. And just hey, Comic-Con people, hit me up, and I'll try to hit you up, and we'll get this to happen.
All right, sounds good.
And I promise, Mark, I'll try to not be taking the walk the next time that you stop by the table.
Okay, sounds good. All right, I appreciate you being a guest today with me, Guy, and thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Guy Gilchrist, for being my special guest. Episode number 59 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a Patreon of Mark Arnold and Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help in continuing the production of my books and this podcast. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel. The opening and closing music for the Fun Ideas podcast is provided courtesy of Andrew the Slow Poisoner Goldfarb and is used with permission. This has been the Fun Ideas podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2020, Fun Ideas Productions, thank you and good night.
Lace to rhinestone kisses on those blind eyelids and drive with your velour chauffeur across the river Styx. Popping creation pills in the pink electric church. The final flicker of your lose.